They say intelligence builds wealth. They're wrong. Intelligence builds plans. Discipline builds empires. Most people think Charlie Munger became rich because he was smart. He wasn't just smart, he was consistent. He mastered a skill rarer than genius, the ability to do nothing when everyone else is doing everything. When I first heard Warren Buffett say, "I'm not smart, I'm disciplined," like Charlie, it didn't make sense. How could discipline be more powerful than brilliance? Until I saw it in action. And what I discovered changed everything I thought I knew about wealth. Charlie Munger didn't come from privilege. He wasn't born in a mansion or raised by investors. He grew up in Omaha, Nebraska, during the Great Depression, in a world where people didn't dream of riches, they dreamed of survival. His father ran a small law practice. Money was tight. Opportunity was scarce. But even as a boy, Charlie's mind worked differently. While other kids played in the streets, Charlie sat in his grandfather's house reading. Not comic books, not adventure stories. He read biographies of successful men, trying to understand what separated those who built something lasting from those who simply got lucky. He noticed something the adults around him missed. People weren't poor because they lacked money. They were poor because they lacked judgment. That observation became the foundation of everything he would build. Years later, he'd refine it into one of his core principles. The world isn't driven by greed. It's driven by misjudgment. He didn't try to outsmart others. He tried to understand their errors and avoid them. That's what discipline really is, the ability to avoid stupidity while the world celebrates chaos. By the time Charlie entered the University of Michigan, and later Harvard Law School, without even finishing his undergraduate degree, he had already developed one of his life's central principles. Invert, always invert. Most people asked, "How do I succeed?" Charlie asked, "How do I avoid failure?" That simple shift turned him into a machine of rational thinking. He didn't chase trends or predict markets. He built mental models, frameworks of thinking that filtered noise into signal. Picture his mind like a vast library. Each book on the shelf represented psychology, physics, economics, biology, history. When he faced a decision, he didn't just analyze it from one angle. He pulled books from every section, cross-referencing patterns until the truth revealed itself. This wasn't just intellectual exercise. It was survival. Discipline, for him, wasn't about control, it was about clarity. He once said, "If you can't discipline your mind, the market will discipline your money." And that became the compass of his entire career. Charlie had seen what impatience did to men like Jess Livermore. Brilliant minds destroyed by their own emotions. Men who could analyze everything except themselves. Livermore mastered markets, but couldn't master time. He read the tape like poetry, but couldn't read his own weaknesses. His story fascinated Charlie, not as inspiration, but as warning. Charlie studied Livermore's rise and fall like a surgeon studying anatomy. He saw that brilliance without discipline was a loaded gun without a safety. Genius plus impatience equals tragedy. Where Livermore sought thrill, Charlie sought truth. Livermore acted on signals. Charlie waited for conviction. One burned bright and fast. The other built empires that lasted generations. The difference wasn't intelligence, it was temperament. It was temperament, Charlie realized, could be trained. Most investors look for strategy. Charlie looked for habits. "You don't rise to the level of your goals," he said. "You fall to the level of your systems." He knew the enemy wasn't competition, it was distraction. So he built a fortress around his attention. Every morning, Charlie woke up at the same time, not because he had to, because routine protected him from decision fatigue. He'd make his coffee, sit at his favorite chair, and read for hours. Not the Wall Street Journal, not earnings reports. He'd read physics, biology, psychology, building what he called a latticework of mental models. His friends thought he was wasting time. "Charlie, why are you reading about evolution? You're supposed to be investing." But Charlie understood something they didn't true. The best investment decisions don't come from studying stocks. They come from studying how humans think and how they fail to think. He didn't seek excitement. He sought understanding. The less excitement you crave, the richer you become. Because wealth doesn't compound in chaos, it compounds in calm. Charlie once said the most powerful word in investing is no. No to bad opportunities. No to fast money. No to what everyone else is doing. He didn't trade often, and he didn't apologize for it. In fact, in his entire partnership with Buffett, there were years where Berkshire Hathaway made only one or two major investments. Just one or two, while other investors made hundreds of trades. Chasing every rumor and trend, Charlie sat still, watching, waiting, sharpening his understanding. He believed in waiting for the fat pitch, the rare, perfect opportunity that deserved all his attention and capital. Buffett once said Munger's ability to wait was superhuman. Charlie replied, "It's not superhuman, it's just uncommon." Because most people don't fail because they make bad decisions. They fail because they make too many decisions. Discipline is not just about control. It's about the art of strategic inaction. Let me tell you about the moment Charlie's discipline was forged in fire. It was 1953. Charlie had just started his own law firm in Los Angeles. He was making good money, $300,000 a year, which in today's dollars would be over $3 million. By any measure, he had made it. But Charlie wasn't satisfied practicing law. He wanted to build something that would compound, not just for years, but for decades. So he started investing on the side. Then disaster struck. His 9-year-old son, Teddy, was diagnosed with leukemia. This was the 1950s. Treatment options were primitive. Charlie spent months watching his boy suffer through painful, ineffective treatments. He held his son's hand through every hospital visit, every setback, every false hope. And then Teddy died. Charlie later said it was the darkest period of his life. His marriage crumbled under the weight of grief. He was emotionally shattered, financially strained from medical bills, and professionally exhausted. Most men would have broken, retreated, given up on ambitious dreams, and settled for safety. But Charlie did something nobody expected. He doubled down on discipline. "I can't control tragedy," he told himself, "but I can control my response to it." That's when discipline stopped being a strategy and became a survival mechanism. He realized that in a world of chaos and pain, the only fortress he had was his own mind. And if he couldn't discipline that, he had nothing. So he rebuilt. Not just his finances, but his entire philosophy of life. He turned his grief into focus, his pain into patience, his loss into a laser-like commitment to never waste another moment on anything that didn't matter. That transformation didn't happen overnight. It took years. Years of waking up to emptiness. Years of forcing himself to read when all he wanted to do was give up. Years of showing up to his office when every fiber of his being wanted to hide. But he showed up anyway, every single day. Because that's what discipline is. It's not motivation. It's not inspiration. It's the decision to act regardless of how you feel. Charlie understood that the hardest thing in life is to sit still while everyone else moves. It's human nature to chase motion, to feel like you're progressing. But in markets, progress often looks like patience. He once said, "There are only a handful of great opportunities in your life. If you wait for the right one and act decisively, that's enough." Think about that. In 70 years of investing, Charlie and Warren made their fortunes on perhaps 20 great decisions. 20. Not 20,000 trades. Not 200. 20. The impatient trader burns capital chasing movement. The disciplined investor lets capital mature like fine wine, untouched, compounding in silence. That's the secret of compounding. It doesn't work for those who interrupt it. Charlie used to tell a story about a farmer who planted an apple tree. Every week, the farmer would dig up the roots to check if they were growing. And every time he did, he damaged the tree a little more. Eventually, the tree died not from disease, but from impatience. That's what most investors do. They plant their capital, then dig it up every day to check if it's growing. They trade in and out, convinced they're being active and smart. But all they're doing is killing the compound. Charlie planted his trees and walked away. He didn't check them daily. He trusted the process and let time do its work. Charlie often studied history, not for nostalgia, but for protection. He admired Livermore's brilliance but pitied his tragedy. Both men had the same tools: intelligence, courage, instinct. But only one mastered the inner game. Livermore let emotion drive him to ruin. He couldn't sit still. He needed action, validation, the thrill of the trade. And that need destroyed him. Charlie built discipline into armor. He turned patience into structure, structure into strategy, and strategy into legacy. To Charlie, discipline wasn't a set of rules. It was a philosophy of life. He treated every decision like an investment. Each one either earns interest or costs interest over time. Most people think financial markets test intelligence. Charlie knew they test character. And the person who wins isn't the one who knows the most. It's the one who can do the least when everyone else loses control. He called it rational endurance. And that endurance is why empires compound while crowds collapse. The difference between ordinary investors and extraordinary ones isn't strategy. It's mindset, the ability to delay gratification long enough for the math to work its magic. Charlie Munger didn't just invest in stocks. He invested in time. While others spent decades chasing the next hot tip, he spent decades letting patience compound into wealth. The big money, he said, is not in the buying and the selling, but in the waiting. Every investor hears that quote. Almost no one lives it, because waiting feels like weakness. It feels like missing out. It feels like doing nothing in a world obsessed with doing everything. But Charlie saw through the illusion. He knew that impatience is the tax the market charges the undisciplined. I remember reading about a dinner party in the 1980s where Charlie sat next to a young hedge fund manager. The guy was bragging about making 40% returns that year through constant trading. "How many trades did you make?" Charlie asked. "About 300, the manager said proudly. Charlie nodded. "And how many of those were truly great ideas?" The manager paused. 10. "So you made 290 unnecessary trades," Charlie said. "And you think that's success?" The room went quiet. Charlie continued. "I made 3 trades this year. All 3 were great ideas. And I'll make 45% when they mature, without the stress, the fees, or the mistakes that come from overactivity." That manager never forgot that conversation. Years later, he admitted that Charlie's words changed how he approached investing entirely. Let me tell you about the day Charlie almost broke his own rule. It was 1962. The Cuban Missile Crisis had just brought the world to the brink of nuclear war. The stock market crashed. Panic swept through Wall Street like wildfire. Charlie had just started his investment partnership, Wheeler, Munger and Company. His investors were calling him daily, voices tight with fear. "Charlie, get out! Sell everything. We're going to war. You'll lose it all." His friends, his family, even other investors he respected, they all said the same thing. "Cut your losses. Run." And for a moment, just a moment, Charlie felt the pull. Not because he believed the fear, but because isolation is painful. When everyone you know is moving in one direction, standing still feels like insanity. He sat in his small office in Los Angeles, staring at his portfolio. The numbers were down. His investors were panicking. The pressure was crushing. But then he did something that defined his entire career. He picked up a book, not a financial report, not a market analysis, a book on human psychology. He read about crowd behavior, about how fear spreads like contagion, about how the surest way to lose money is to act when everyone else is acting. And he realized this wasn't a time to move. This wasn't a time to be still. So while his friends sold at the bottom, Charlie sat in his office and read. He didn't buy. He didn't sell. He just waited, calm, patient, unmoved by the storm. When the crisis passed and the market recovered, his portfolio hadn't just survived. It had positioned him for one of the greatest buying opportunities of the decade. That moment taught him something he'd never forget. Discipline isn't tested when things are going well. It's tested when the world is screaming at you to break. And the only way to pass that test is to have practiced discipline so deeply that it becomes reflex. Charlie once described the modern investor's disease as the worship of motion. People can't stand still, not in markets, not in life. They scroll, trade, refresh, repeat, addicted to the illusion of productivity. Activity, he said, is the enemy of results. He called it noise and treated it like radiation, invisible, constant, deadly in the long run. While traders chased charts, he chased clarity. He read science, psychology, history, building a latticework of mental models that made him dangerous in a world full of specialists. He didn't want to be the best stock picker. He wanted to be the best thinker. That's why Charlie's genius can't be replicated by copying trades. You have to copy his discipline of mind, his ability to see clearly when everyone else is blinded by emotion. Picture Charlie's daily routine. It's not what you'd expect from a billionaire. No early morning conference calls. No teams of analysts briefing him on market movements. No Bloomberg terminal flashing numbers. Instead, every morning, Charlie wakes up in the same house he's lived in for decades. He makes his own breakfast. Then he sits in his reading chair, the same chair for 40 years, and reads for 6 hours, not emails, not news. Books. Deep, difficult books on subjects that have nothing to do with investing, evolution, physics, cognitive psychology, the history of civilizations. His friends used to joke, "Charlie, when do you actually work?" He'd smile and say, "This is the work. Everything else is just execution." Because Charlie understood something most people miss. The quality of your decisions is determined by the quality of your thinking. And the quality of your thinking is determined by what you feed your mind. Garbage in, garbage out. Wisdom in, wealth out. That reading habit, boring, repetitive, undramatic, compounded over 50 years into one of the sharpest minds in financial history. Discipline isn't glamorous, but it's the only thing that compounds forever. Charlie turned patience into a system. He knew that waiting was only powerful if it was guided by principle. So he built filters, rules that decided when to act and when to stay still. He wouldn't invest unless 3 boxes were checked. One, can I understand it? Not just the business model, but the underlying principles. If he couldn't explain it to a child, he didn't touch it. 2, is it within my circle of competence? Charlie drew a clear boundary around what he knew and what he didn't. He never crossed that line, no matter how tempting the opportunity. 3, is it priced right enough that I can sleep at night? He didn't need the perfect price. He needed a margin of safety so wide that even if he was wrong, he wouldn't get hurt. If the answer wasn't yes to all 3, he didn't even consider it. No fear of missing out, no ego, no exceptions. Discipline gave him freedom, the freedom to ignore everything that didn't matter. This filtering system saved him from countless mistakes. In the late 1990s, during the dot-com bubble, everyone was getting rich on in-it stocks. Charlie's own investors were frustrated. "Why aren't we buying tech stocks?" they demanded. "We're missing the greatest bull market in history." Charlie's response was simple. "I don't understand how these companies make money, so I'm not investing." His investors were furious. Some left. But Charlie didn't budge. He stuck to his system. When the bubble burst in 2000, those who chased the trend lost everything. Charlie's portfolio, filled with boring, profitable companies, kept compounding. That's the power of discipline. It protects you from your worst impulses. People always expected brilliance to look complex. But Charlie's brilliance looked boring. He didn't try to predict inflation or time interest rates. He didn't run 10 screens of charts or jump between crypto, gold, and tech stops. He waited quietly for inevitability. It's not supposed to be easy, he said. Anyone who finds it easy is stupid. The hardest thing about investing is resisting the urge to look smart. Because the moment you need look smart, you stop being wise. Let me tell you about one of Charlie's greatest investments and how discipline made it possible. It was 1972. Charlie and Warren were looking at a small candy company in California called See's Candies. The company was family-owned, profitable by customers. The asking price was $25 million. Most investors passed. Why? Because by traditional metrics, it was overpriced. The book value was only $8 million. You were paying a huge premium for what? Goodwill brand. Intangibles. But Charlie saw something others didn't. He saw that See's had pricing power. Every year, they could raise prices slightly, and customers would keep buying. Why? Because See's wasn't just selling candy. They were selling tradition, memory, love. You don't price shop nostalgia. Charlie did the math. If See's could raise prices 5% per year without losing customers, and if they could maintain their margins, the cash flows would compound beautifully over decades. But here's where discipline came in. The temptation was to negotiate hard, to try to get the price down to 20 million, 18 million. But Charlie knew that if this business was as good as he thought, haggling over a few million now could cost him billions later. So they paid the 25 million. Full price, no tricks. And over the next 50 years, See's Candies generated over $2 billion in profit for Berkshire Hathaway. That's the power of discipline. Charlie didn't need to be clever. He needed to be right and patient enough to let the math work. Most people think compounding is a mathematical concept. To Charlie, it was psychological. The first rule of compounding, he said, is never interrupt it unnecessarily. He wasn't just talking about money. He was talking about character, relationships, habits, knowledge, every form of growth that multiplies over time. Discipline was his shield against interruption. When others changed strategy every year, he refined the same one for decades. That's why he and Buffett didn't just grow rich, they grew inevitable. Compounding rewards one trait above all others: endurance. Charlie often warned, it's not greed that ruins people, it's envy. He saw investors who couldn't stand to watch others get rich faster. And that envy, not risk, not the market, destroyed them. I remember reading about a meeting Charlie had with a young investor in the late 1990s, during the dot-com bubble. The kid was frustrated. Charlie, everyone's making millions in tech stocks. I'm sitting here with boring companies, and I'm getting crushed. What am I supposed to do? Charlie looked at him and said, if you can't be happy seeing someone else get rich faster than you, you'll never be rich yourself. The kid didn't understand. He thought Charlie was being philosophical. But Charlie was being tactical, because envy drives motion, and motion kills compounding. That young investor eventually caved. He sold his boring, profitable companies and bought tech stocks at the peak. When the bubble burst, he lost everything. Meanwhile, Charlie's boring companies kept compounding, quietly, unstoppably. Charlie spent years cataloging what he called the psychology of human misjudgment. He identified 25 ways the human brain sabotages itself: answering bias, social proof, loss aversion, commitment bias. He turned psychology into armor. Because once you understand why people act irrationally, you no longer need to join them. I never allow myself to have an opinion on anything that I don't understand better than the other side. That single sentence is discipline distilled into wisdom. He didn't debate. He didn't argue. He just made sure that when he formed an opinion, he'd already considered every counterargument, every alternative explanation, every blind spot. That's not arrogance. That's preparation. And then came the moment that almost destroyed him, and instead made him unbreakable. It was the early 1970s. Charlie was in his late 40s, at the height of his career. And then, suddenly, he started losing his vision. A complication from cataract surgery left him blind in one eye. The other eye was failing too. Doctors said he might go completely blind. For a man whose entire life was built on reading, on learning, on seeing patterns others missed, this was a death sentence. His friends watched him closely, waiting for him to break. But Charlie didn't rage. He didn't despair. He didn't stop. He adapted. He had his assistants read to him. He listened to audiobooks. He trained his remaining eye to work harder. And most importantly, he continued his routine. The same discipline, the same patience, the same relentless focus on what he could control. Years later, someone asked him how he handled it. Charlie said, "Self-pity is a terrible thing. I watched my son die. I've lost fortunes. I've lost my vision. And I realized that feeling sorry for yourself is the fastest way to ruin what's left." That's discipline at its core. Not just controlling your actions, but controlling your response to what you cannot control. Livermore and Munger lived in different centuries, one ruled by ticker tapes, the other by compound interest. But their lessons meet in the same place at the battlefield of human behavior. Livermore's tragedy was impatience. Munger's triumph was endurance. Where Livermore chased action, Charlie mastered stillness. Where Livermore trusted instinct, Charlie trusted process. Where Livermore sought excitement, Charlie sought truth. Livermore taught us pain. Charlie teaches power. Together, they form the blueprint for what every investor secretly wants: control. After half a century of compounding wisdom, Charlie left behind one rule that explains everything. The world is not driven by greed. It's driven by envy and impatience. Control those two, and the rest takes care of itself. That's why the man who never rushed, the man who waited decades for the right moment, built a legacy that time itself compounds. He didn't chase wealth. He attracted it by aligning with the rhythm of patience and the symmetry of discipline. In his final years, Charlie would sit in his modest office, no assistants, no screens, no distractions, and read, just like he'd done for 70 years. And someone once asked him, "Charlie, you're worth billions. You've achieved everything. Why are you still reading 6 hours a day?" He smiled. "Because," he said, "I'm not trying to get richer. I'm trying to get wiser. And wisdom doesn't compound unless you feed it." That's the lesson most people miss. Charlie didn't become wealthy because he wanted money. He became wealthy because he mastered himself. And once you master yourself, wealth is just a side effect. If you've made it this far, you're already part of the 1% who get it. You understand that markets don't just test your wallet, they test your will. This isn't about making money fast. It's about mastering yourself slowly. Before you go, ask yourself, am I reacting or am I compounding? Am I chasing motion or am I building systems? Am I driven by envy or am I guided by discipline? Because the market doesn't care about your intelligence. It cares about your temperament. If this message resonated with you, you're the kind of thinker this channel was built for. Subscribe to Mind Over Markets, where every story sharpens your mind and every idea compounds your edge. Comment below and tell me what's one lesson discipline has taught you the hard way. Share a moment when patience saved you or when impatience cost you, because your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear. And remember, the market rewards those who master themselves first. Discipline isn't glamorous. It's not loud. It doesn't make you feel like a genius at dinner parties. But in the end, it's the only thing that compounds forever. Charlie Munger proved that. Not with theories or predictions, but with a life lived in quiet. Relentless discipline, one decision, one day, one decade at a time. That's how empires are built. Not in the noise, in the silence. Subscribe for those who build, not chase. Comment below what's one discipline you're building right now. The discipline rule, the only rule that builds empires.